Hi everyone. Tonight, we begin our journey through the echoing stone halls of a medieval fortress. Torches dance along the walls, their flames flickering, while the faint whistle of wind slides through cracks in the great wooden doors. It's the kind of setting that looks picturesque when visited as a tourist, but if you had to live here, especially on a winter night, you'd regret it within the first hour. The truth is simple, castles were freezing. If you tried sleeping in one without central heating, insulated windows, or a proper mattress by modern standards, you'd quickly learn that your biggest threat wasn't enemy knights, but the cold itself. You probably wouldn't last long without a few survival tricks. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, only if you truly enjoy what I create. And if you're listening right now, share your location and the current time in the comments below. I love seeing where in the world everyone is tuning in from. Now dim the lights, steady your breathing, and imagine preparing for bed inside a medieval stronghold. You trudge across the flagstone floor of a vast chamber, boots scraping over surfaces worn smooth by countless feet. The cold bites your skin even through your clothes. Stone walls don't merely resist warmth, they devour it. Historians praise castles for their defensive design, but rarely for comfort. And here's the blunt truth. The same walls that deflected battering rams also trapped cold air like an enormous refrigerator. Once the sun went down, the interior temperature dropped nearly as fast as it did outside. Your breath forms small clouds in the air. The atmosphere feels heavy, damp, unwelcoming. Castles were built to keep invaders out, not to keep warmth in. Architects focused on moats, drawbridges, and arrow slits. Insulation never crossed their minds. Many fortresses across northern Europe were perched on exposed hills. From a military point of view, brilliant. You could spot enemies miles away, and the elevation gave you the advantage. But for sleeping, it was a curse. Wind lashed every surface, forcing icy drafts through cracks in shutters and gaps beneath doors. You couldn't have designed a worse bedroom if you'd tried. You might think fireplaces would solve the problem, but no. Even a blazing fire in the great hall only warmed those huddled right beside it. Move a few steps away and the chill returned. By the time you climbed to your bedchamber, the temperature felt closer to that of a cellar than a living room. In fact, travelers of the late medieval era wrote about frost forming inside bedrooms. Imagine waking to icicles hanging from your bed curtains, or finding your wash basin frozen solid. Chroniclers mentioned such details casually, as if frost indoors were just part of life. If your chamber didn't gather a thin layer of rime on the walls by January, you were among the lucky few. And yet somehow people survived. They developed rituals, nightly routines to preserve whatever warmth they could. The castle might be immense, but by night, the goal was always to make it smaller. Fires were banked, beds enclosed with curtains, layers of clothing piled on until movement was a challenge, and everyone hoped the night's drafts wouldn't be too cruel. Picture stepping into a medieval bedchamber. The bed stands high above the floor, not for style, but to escape the coldest air that settles low. Still, the stone radiates chill upward, seeping through the mattress the moment you lie down. Historians still debate whether castles truly grew more comfortable over the centuries, or whether later, storytellers exaggerated the luxury of noble life. Some argue that thick draperies and wall tapestries genuinely helped warm rooms, while others insist the cold always won no matter how much fabric was hung. The truth likely sits in between. Conditions improved somewhat, but never to what we'd call comfortable. You lie back, the wood creaking, straw bedding rustling beneath you. Outside, the wind groans against the battlements. The only light comes from a small oil lamp flickering at your bedside, and even that flame struggles to live. Your toes already ache from the cold. Despite being wrapped in your day clothes, the sounds of a castle night reach you, the echo of boots on stone as guards change watch, the groan of rafters under frost, a faint dog's bark from the courtyard, muffled by thick walls. Water drips somewhere, freezing as it falls. None of it brings warmth, only a reminder of how harsh the world is beyond your fragile cocoon. It's easy to imagine nobles sleeping in luxury while peasants froze in their huts. But ironically, peasants sometimes fared better. Their small timber cottages trapped heat from the hearth more efficiently than the cavernous chambers of a lord's keep. A single fire in a peasant hut could warm the whole family. Meanwhile, a noble might shiver in a chamber so vast that even 5 fireplaces couldn't dent the chill. That irony wasn't lost on those who lived it. Surviving letters from clergy and nobles complain of sleepless winter nights in castles. They describe beds as grand, but the nights as punishingly cold, advising travelers to pack extra cloaks, not for show, but survival. Lying there, you begin to admire their ingenuity. Sleep required preparation, stacking fabrics, drawing curtains tight, sharing beds with companions, human or animal. Every act was a strategy to create tiny pockets of warmth in an environment built by nature and architecture to be relentlessly cold. These people weren't just lords and warriors. They were survivalists. Every bedtime was a test. Every winter a trial. Sleep itself, something effortless to us, had to be engineered through ritual passed down for generations. Imagine the gratitude you'd feel for every flicker of heat. A dog curled at your feet, hot stones beneath the bedding, the small victory of keeping frost from your beard. Those moments would outshine any feast or hunt. Survival was memorable. So tonight, as you lie in your modern bed, central heating humming softly, spare a thought for those who once shivered in stone chambers. Their nights were long, their mornings bitter, but they endured. They found ways to sleep in places that should have been unlivable. That persistence is what we'll continue to explore, layer by layer, trick by trick, as this journey carries us deeper into the medieval night. You step into the great hall now, the living heart of any medieval castle. If the bedchamber was a tomb of stone and drafts, this space at least pulsed with flickers of life and warmth. Long wooden tables stretch from end to end, their surfaces polished smooth by centuries of elbows and mugs. The air is thick with the scent of roasted meat, spilled ale, damp wool, and lingering smoke that never truly leaves the rafters. At the center burns a roaring fire, a stubborn square of orange light defying the winter darkness beyond the walls. Here, the castle finally feels alive after sunset. People gather not just to eat, but to soak up every ounce of heat before retreating to their icy chambers. Servants dart between benches with platters of steaming pottage and trenchers of bread, while dogs skitter beneath their feet, tails wagging, snatching at dropped scraps. The hall rings with laughter, song, and the rhythmic clatter of knives against plates. For a brief time, the world outside, its howling winds and forming frost, feels far away. The truth, though, is that the great hall was the only room where heat truly existed. A massive hearth dominated the space, fed constantly during winter with wood, sometimes entire tree trunks to keep it alive. Those of higher rank claimed the best seats near the blaze, basking in its glow, while servants and lesser guests huddled at the edges, pretending not to shiver. Even here, warmth had a hierarchy, but there was a catch. Heat traveled only so far. The farther you sat from the flames, the more the chill crept back in until it felt as if the very walls exhaled frost. Warm air rose toward the blackened beams overhead, leaving those on the ground wrapped in cloaks, shoulder to shoulder for comfort. In truth, only a few ever truly felt warm. Everyone else pretended. Chroniclers even note that great feasts served a double purpose: celebration and survival. Nobles often held their largest gatherings in the dead of winter, counting on the body heat of hundreds of guests to transform the hall into something approaching cozy. In some accounts, servants were even instructed to stand closer together to help generate warmth. Feasting, it seems, was as much about endurance as indulgence, but when the revelry faded and the minstrels packed away their lutes, the illusion of warmth vanished quickly. The fire was allowed to burn low, its embers glowing red, a final defiance before the cold reclaimed the hall. Shadows stretched across the walls like long frozen fingers. Within an hour, the once lively chamber fell silent and bitter again. Imagine yourself lingering near that hearth, reluctant to leave. You hold your hands to the flames, drawing every bit of heat into your skin. Your cheeks glow hot, but already the back of your body feels the bite of cold creeping up again. Smoke stings your eyes and clings to your hair, yet you dread the climb up the spiral staircase, to your chamber even more. Historians still debate whether some castles managed to design more effective heating systems for their great halls, flues, or vents to circulate warm air. Some claim these existed in later centuries. Others call them romantic myths. Most agree on the harsher reality. Warmth was fleeting, confined to a narrow radius around the fire, leaving the rest of the room a cavernous vault of chill. Even the acoustics reinforced the scale of discomfort. Every laugh echoed too loud, every footstep amplified until the soundscape itself felt too vast, too cold. And when the hall emptied, the silence was oppressive, like sitting inside the sleeping lungs of a giant made of stone. The moment that best defines medieval life might be the transition, the walk from the great hall to your bedchamber. You step from that golden glow into a narrow corridor, lit only by a single torch. Instantly, a knife-edged draft cuts through your cloak. Air hisses through arrow slits and under doors, and your breath fogs in front of your face again. The heat you'd hoarded moments ago drains away as if the castle itself were feeding on it. That shift from fleeting warmth to bitter cold marked every medieval night. Nobles lingered by the fire until exhaustion overcame them, some even sleeping on benches beside the hearth rather than face the icy rooms above. A tall-backed chair or pile of cloaks could make a makeshift bed. Servants and guards often did the same, collapsing near the embers despite smoke and sparks. Compared to the stone chill upstairs, it was paradise. Curiously, travelers often wrote that the most dreadful part of the night wasn't the sleep itself, but the journey to it. That short, punishing walk from the hall to the chamber was said to send shivers through the body that lasted till dawn. It was as though the castle punished you for daring to think you might be comfortable. The fading glow of the great hall had a psychological weight too. Leaving it meant surrendering to the night. Every torch snuffed, every cup drained was a step toward a shivering ordeal. The fire that had roared now whispered faintly, sparks popping before dying. A servant might poke it once more, sigh and walk away, leaving the embers to fade. The laughter and song gave way to the groan of the timbers and the sigh of the wind. And so you turn reluctantly toward the staircase, wrapping your cloak tighter, carrying the ghost of warmth in your memory. Each step higher, the chill grows sharper. Your toes numb, your fingers sting, and you realize the rest of the night will be a battle for heat. That brief glow from the hall kept people sane, a ritual of light and company before surrendering again to the cold. Without it, castle life might have been unbearable. With it, people at least remembered what warmth felt like, even if only for a few hours. Now, as you climb higher into the keep, the air changes again. The warmth of the fire is gone. What remains is a damp, creeping cold that clings to your skin. The walls are astonishingly thick, sometimes 12 feet of solid stone between you and the outside world. At first, that seems reassuring, but the irony is cruel. The same walls that stopped arrows and battering rams also trapped the chill within. If you've ever stood in a basement during winter, you know the feeling. The stone seems to remember cold. It radiates it endlessly, long after the air might have warmed. Medieval builders mastered strength and endurance, but never comfort. Their fortresses defended against men, not weather. Historians agree on this much. No matter how large the fire, warmth never traveled far. A blazing hearth could heat a small bubble around it, but take 10 steps away and you were already back in an icebox. Records from the 13th and 14th centuries describe noble families huddled directly before the flames, cloaks pulled over their heads, while servants stamped their feet behind them to keep the blood moving. The fire gave light and survival, but not luxury. Some travelers even complained that the walls themselves sweated. Condensation ran down the stone in thin rivulets, leaving the rooms damp and gloomy. Imagine lying awake, listening to the slow drip of moisture beside your bed. In some seasons, moss crept up the inner walls, turning chambers into half-caves. People hung tapestries not just for decoration, but as a desperate defense. Did they work? Scholars still argue. Some claim thick cloth helped block drafts and hold heat. Others insist that even the finest fabrics couldn't defeat the cold that seeped through every crack and window. Perhaps both are true. The effort mattered as much as the result. Now imagine stepping into such a bedchamber. It's late January. The fire in the hearth burns low. The walls gleam damp in the lamplight. Even swaddled in wool, you shiver. A great bed stands in the center. Curtains drawn, the space inside just a few degrees warmer than the rest of the room. Beyond those curtains, the chamber feels like a crypt of stone. People wrote of dreading the cold more than hunger or illness. At least hunger passed. The cold never did. It was a nightly siege that lasted for months. The very fortress built to protect you felt like a prison. As you pull the covers tight, you hear the wind hiss through arrow slits. Your ears sting, your fingers stiffen, even your dreams freeze, haunted by ice and fire. The castle, for all its strength, becomes a tomb that never sleeps. Castles weren't built for comfort. They were built for endurance. Safety had a price, and every winter night reminded you of it. The stone might save you from enemies, but it would never save you from the cold. You shuffle across the chamber floor, and instead of carpet or polished wood, your boots crunch on something far humbler. Rushes scattered thick across the stone. They weren't mere decoration. They were an attempt at comfort, insulation, and cleanliness all at once. These straw-like reeds softened the step, absorbed spills, and most importantly, trapped a thin layer of air between your feet and the cold stone below. Documents from the later Middle Ages describe how entire households replaced the rushes several times a year, laying them thick in noble halls and chambers. Freshly strewn, they smelled faintly of summer, grassy, green, a whisper of warmth brought indoors. For a while it felt as though someone had carried a bit of the outside world in with them. The soft crackle underfoot offered both sound and scent, a reminder of life amid the lifeless stone. But the charm never lasted. Weeks turned the rushes foul. Bits of food, spilled ale, stray bones from the last feast, all disappeared into the layers. Mice and insects moved in, turning the floor into their playground. If you're picturing a rustic but cozy carpet, think again. By spring, those rushes could be so filthy that one French writer compared them to sleeping in a dung heap. And yet, for all that filth, they served a purpose. The rushes acted like primitive insulation, absorbing the constant damp that trickled from walls and ceilings. Without them, the stone floors would stay slick with condensation and puddles. Household accounts even mention adding herbs like lavender, rosemary, or meadowgrass among the reeds, not just to mask the smell, but because people believed the fragrant plants purified the air and discouraged pests. Imagine lying down at night and catching a faint whiff of lavender beneath the stronger sense of wet wool, smoke, and humanity. It wasn't comfort exactly, but it was a kind of kindness to the senses, an effort to make the cold more bearable. Historians still debate whether these rushes truly added warmth or merely provided psychological relief. Some say they created a modest insulating mat. Others argue their purpose was more ceremonial, a display of domestic order amid filth. Either way, they were a small but essential part of the medieval fight against cold. Now picture yourself in that chamber. A servant finishes scattering new rushes across the floor. They crunch softly as he moves, releasing earthy aromas. For a brief moment, the room feels refreshed, almost civilized. Yet by morning, those rushes will already be damp again, and the slow decay will begin anew. Imagine the sensory world of this room, the rough feel of wool against your skin, the smoky air clinging to every fabric, the constant rustle of straw beneath your boots. and the faint scratching of mice hunting for crumbs. Every sensation reminds you that this isn't luxury, it's survival. But in that survival, there's ingenuity. Medieval people turned the simplest of materials, plants pulled from riversides, into tools against the cold. They didn't think in terms of carpets or insulation. They thought in terms of whatever stood between them and the stone's chill. Even the floor was part of the nightly battle. Stone was the enemy, rushes the fragile shield. And each morning began with the same question. How long could those two coexist before they betrayed you with damp and decay? You sit now on the edge of the bed, fingers brushing the layers of cloth piled high. If there was one true weapon against the night's cold, it was fabric. Wool, linen, fur, all woven, layered and stacked until sleepers resembled cocoons more than people. Household inventories show how central textiles were to daily life. Linen sheets formed the base, smooth, cool and clean, though not especially warm. Above came thick woolen blankets, so heavy that some compared their weight to that of a hound. For the wealthy, furs topped it all. Fox, sable, ermine, or bear, both symbols of status and tools of survival. It said that servants joked their masters could barely move once tucked in, so many layers pinned them down. Imagine lying there swaddled beneath 5 or 6 heavy blankets, too tightly bound to turn without effort, knowing that one wrong tug could let the cold in. Warmth demanded stillness. It was comfort at the price of mobility, and few complained about the trade. Fur deserves special attention. Beyond fashion, it was a genuine defense. Arctic fox, marten, or sheepskin all offered dense, radiant heat. One chronicler from Burgundy wrote of a noblewoman who refused to travel anywhere without her fur-lined covers, even in summer, afraid of catching a chill at night. Absurd perhaps to modern readers, but in an age of relentless drafts, such fear was rational. Some households even developed theories about layering. Linen, they claimed, drew heat from the body, so it should never sit closest to the skin. Wool trapped warmth and fur sealed it in. Thus was born the textile sandwich, a peculiar mix of science and superstition, yet one that reflected the desperate creativity of a world without insulation. Scholars still debate whether furs were used more for status or survival. Records show that nobles hoarded them in extravagant numbers, while the poor made do with rough wool. But both classes shared the same goal: to live through the night. Whether adorned with ermine or wrapped in scratchy homespun, warmth was the great equalizer. Now imagine lying under those layers. The wool itches faintly. The fur smells musky and thick. The combined weight presses you deep into the straw mattress, making every breath an act of defiance against the cold. You shift only slightly, aware that the air outside your cocoon is frigid enough to sting exposed skin. Your own breath warms the small space near your face, while everything else relies on cloth and animal skin to keep the frost at bay. The silence is profound, broken only by the rustle of fabric and the sigh of wind at the window. Wrapped in these layers, you feel at once suffocated and safe. Every fiber is part of nature's arsenal. Linen from flax, wool from sheep, fur from beasts of the forest. Your bed becomes a fortress built not of stone, but of living textures. To rest here is to retreat into the embrace of the earth itself. That perhaps is the essence of medieval sleep, to turn every scrap of the natural world into armor. The night is cold and merciless, but you've built a fortress of fabric to meet it. Each thread is a battlement, each blanket a wall. Without them, even the grandest castle chamber would feel like a crypt. So you lie still, weighed down by warmth, listening to the moan of the wind. Outside, the world freezes. Inside, you've carved a pocket of fragile life out of the cold. Sleep doesn't come easily, but when it does, it's the reward of a victory fought nightly with wool, fur, and faith in the simplest of things. The bed itself was more than just furniture. It was a survival device, an instrument built to create a small, livable climate inside a hostile room. When you pull back the heavy curtains of a medieval four-poster bed, you aren't just peeking into someone's sleeping space. You're entering a carefully engineered micro-world. Records from noble households show how important these grand beds were. Unlike the simple straw pallets of peasants, the noble bed stood high, carved from oak or walnut, with posts as tall as a man. Those towering posts supported a canopy above, not for decoration but for defense. Draping heavy curtains down the sides trapped body heat and created a miniature chamber within the chamber, a tent of warmth inside the cavernous cold. When the curtains were drawn, the difference could be striking. Your breath, the warmth of your body, even the faint heat from your blankets collected inside, raising the temperature just enough to make the space bearable. Within a room that hovered near freezing, that tiny microclimate could mean the difference between comfort and suffering. One story tells of a French duchess who refused to travel without her bed. Her servants dismantled it piece by piece, loading the posts and canopy onto carts whenever she moved between castles. It might sound extravagant, but to her the bed wasn't a luxury, it was essential equipment. Sleeping in a strange place without her own curtains was unthinkable. It would mean enduring the night's full cold alone. In England, some beds even had curtains lined with oiled cloth or waxed linen to block drafts. Imagine pulling those curtains closed, their heavy folds smelling faintly of beeswax or resin. The world outside becomes muffled, distant, softer. The air within is still cold, yes, but no longer cutting. The space feels intimate, enclosed, almost secret. Historians still debate how effective these beds truly were. Did they genuinely keep sleepers warm, or did later generations romanticize their comfort? Surviving fabrics suggest the curtains were thick and layered, which means they probably did help. But even if their insulation was modest, the psychological comfort was undeniable. Inside that enclosed space, you could believe you'd won a small victory over the cold. To medieval people, belief itself was power. The canopy bed wasn't just a physical shield, it was a mental one, a symbol of order and safety amid chaos and chill. That's why nobles prized them so deeply. They represented the idea that even in a world of stone and frost, human ingenuity could carve out warmth. Picture yourself sliding into one of those beds now. The straw mattress rustles beneath you as you settle in. You reach to pull the curtains closed, and instantly the air shifts. The drafts that crept in moments ago now stop. The faint drip of condensation from the walls fades. Even distant noises, the bark of a dog, the echo of boots on stone, grow soft. Within this small pocket of space, your breath warms the air. It smells of wool, smoke, and fur, earthy, musky, alive. The outside world is still cold, the castle still a maze of stone, but here you've claimed a sliver of comfort. For a few hours, this is your sanctuary. Of course, the system wasn't perfect. Some nights condensation froze on the curtains themselves. Other times, the smoke from the hearth drifted inside, choking you awake. But even so, the canopy bed was the best weapon nobles had against the nightly siege of cold. It's a reminder that medieval ingenuity didn't always come from grand inventions. It came from clever adaptations. No central heating, then build your own miniature room within the room. No insulation, then hang layers of cloth thick enough to catch your breath and hold it there. Every night was a negotiation with the cold, and the canopy bed was the closest thing to a truce. Imagine lying there now, your eyelids heavy, the castle's silence pressing in. Beyond the curtain, the air is icy, the walls unyielding, but inside this soft fortress, survival feels possible. You drift towards sleep, not because the room has grown warm, but because you've managed to trick the cold, if only slightly. Beneath all those blankets and curtains, another battle waited, the one between your body and the mattress itself. What lay under you determined whether you'd wake rested or aching, alive or half frozen. In the Middle Ages, two main types of bedding ruled, the feather bed and the straw tick. The feather bed was the prize of the wealthy, a sack stuffed thick with goose or duck feathers, soft, pliable, and miraculously warm. To sink into one was to disappear into a cloud. Some noble households listed feather beds among their most valuable possessions, carrying them on travels like treasure. A well-stuffed feather mattress could rise nearly a foot above the bed frame, a buoyant cushion in a world of stone and frost. Families guarded them carefully, even passing them down through generations. They weren't only comfortable, they were status itself. But perfection had a flaw. Too many feathers, and the sleeper would sink too deep, smothered by warmth. One guest in the 15th century wrote humorously that his host's bed swallowed him whole. The comfort became a trap. Most people, however, slept on straw ticks, simple sacks filled with hay, reeds or dry grass. They were cheap, quick to replace, and at least kept you off the icy floor. Soldiers, peasants, and even castle servants relied on them. But straw flattened fast, poked through the cloth, and often teemed with fleas. Beds had to be beaten regularly, literally whacked and shaken to fluff the straw and drive out pests. To make them bearable, some people mixed herbs like lavender or mint into the filling, believing the scent would both mask the mustiness and repel vermin. The smell of damp hay mingled with smoke and sweat, earthy, persistent, never quite clean. Historians still argue about how common feather beds truly were. Some think they were reserved for the elite. Others note that even modest households sometimes owned one, prized above all else. But no matter the material, straw or feather, each mattress told the same story. Sleep was a daily victory, not a luxury. Now imagine lying down on a straw tick. The surface shifts unevenly beneath you. A stalk pokes your leg. You roll, releasing a faint scent of hay and crushed herbs. The blankets above press heavy, and somewhere under the rushes you hear the tiny scurry of a mouse. It isn't comfort as we know it, but it's enough to survive. Then picture the opposite, a noble's feather bed. You sink deep into it, enveloped by softness. For a moment it feels like floating, until the heat becomes too much. You roll into a hollow, half suffocated by luxury, yet still aware of how much worse it could be. Better too warm than frozen. In the end, the choice between straw and feather mirrored society itself. To sleep on feathers was privilege, to sleep on straw was necessity. But both choices met the same purpose, to outlast the cold, to greet the dawn alive. Every mattress, every layer, every breath of warmth was earned. Medieval sleep wasn't passive. It was an act of endurance. People didn't just collapse into bed. They strategized for survival. Even the grandest bed, with its curtains, feathers, and blankets, couldn't always guarantee warmth on its own. What truly made the difference on the coldest nights wasn't furniture. It was companionship. Sleeping alone in a stone chamber meant your body heat vanished into the walls. Sleeping beside others meant your warmth multiplied. Bodies became radiators pressed together in the dark, and this simple human closeness could save lives. Noble families knew this, though they rarely admitted it openly. Servants often slept nearby, in adjoining rooms or even on pallets beside their master's bed. The arrangement wasn't just about duty, it was survival. Every extra body in a room added a few precious degrees of heat. At first you might not notice it, but come midnight, when frost formed on the inside of shutters, every heartbeat and breath helped keep the space alive. Monastic life followed the same logic. Medieval monks slept in long rows, their cots lined shoulder to shoulder inside cold dormitories. The communal design wasn't only for discipline, it was also practical. Shared body heat created a thin blanket of warmth over the room, turning a freezing hall into something survivable. Soldiers in barracks relied on the same principle, huddled under their cloaks, trusting that together they could endure what alone might have been fatal. One curious story from a 14th century English manor describes a nobleman's will that granted his favorite squire the right to sleep near the chamber fire. Scholars believe it was more than a mark of affection. It was a sign of trust, an acknowledgement that warmth was a privilege. To be allowed to share proximity to heat or to a lord's presence meant safety in both body and rank. There was another layer to the idea of shared warmth. Animals, Dogs in particular became living heaters. The saying "a three-dog night" may have been coined much later, but its roots reach deep into the medieval experience. Dogs weren't only guardians or hunting companions, they were warmth itself. A pair of hounds curled at the foot of your bed could mean the difference between comfort and frostbite. Household records mention small lapdogs given as gifts to noblewomen, not only for affection, but for their ability to keep their owners warm. Larger breeds sprawled like logs at the foot of beds, while little ones tucked beneath blankets or in folds of furred covers. In humble cottages, animals of every kind, dogs, goats, sheep, sometimes shared the sleeping space. Travelers' diaries tell of guests choosing to sleep in stables rather than in the unheated guest rooms, finding comfort in the warmth of livestock. Imagine it, lying beside a cow or horse, the air thick with the smell of hay and breath, but at least you were warm. There's a French proverb from the Middle Ages that says, "A faithful dog keeps the frost from his master's heart." It was literal and poetic. The dog's warmth sustained the body. Its nearness soothed the spirit. In a world of cold stone and howling winds, that companionship could mean the difference between misery and endurance. Some scholars argue that, in formal noble households, letting dogs in bed was frowned upon, while others suggest it was a common indulgence behind closed doors. The truth likely lies in between. Etiquette forbade it, but necessity ignored etiquette. In rural or frontier castles, warmth outweighed propriety. The sight of a lady sharing her covers with a small hound might have been less scandalous than it sounds. It was simply practical. Now picture the scene. You lie bundled in your nightshirt and cloaks, curtains drawn tight, your toes aching with cold. Then a warm weight presses against your legs, a hound settling into the crook of your knees, sighing deeply before it sleeps. Another curls against your side. The smell of fur and earth fills the air, mingling with smoke and wool. The chamber beyond is still freezing, but inside this living cocoon, comfort exists at last. Yes, it came with downsides, fleas, dirt, and the occasional gnawed bone hidden in the bedding, but few would trade that warmth for cleanliness. Better fleas than frostbite. Better a bit of mud than an unbroken night of shivering. The sensory world of the bed becomes intimate, the dog's breathing steady beside you, the weight of blankets pressing down, the faint crackle of the dying hearth. These were the sounds and smells of survival. To share warmth was to share life. The practice of bed sharing extended beyond animals and servants. It was family tradition. Among peasants, it was necessity. Entire households slept together. Parents, children, and grandparents piled beneath a single blanket, limbs tangled for warmth. Privacy meant nothing when survival demanded closeness. In those cottages, the single hearth's heat reached everyone, and the family became one organism against the cold. To modern minds, the thought of such closeness feels uncomfortable, but to medieval sleepers it was common sense. Companionship was insulation. Warmth was communal. As you imagine lying there, dogs at your feet, companions breathing softly nearby, the castle's vastness feels less threatening. The wind still moans outside, but inside this nest of life the cold loses its hold. You finally begin to understand what medieval people knew instinctively. Survival was shared, and once the candle was blown out, another layer of defense took over, clothing itself. Unlike our modern habit of sleeping in light pajamas or nothing at all, medieval people rarely went to bed undressed. In their world, clothing was armor against the night. Surviving records and preserved garments tell the story clearly. The staple of medieval nightwear was the long linen shirt. Loose, straight, and ankle length, it looked much like a tunic. Linen might not seem warm to us, but it was practical. Easy to clean, smooth against the skin, and breathable beneath heavier layers. Over that, many wore woolen garments or cloaks, especially in winter. To the medieval sleeper, more layers always meant more safety. And then came the crucial accessory, the nightcap. These caps, sometimes tied under the chin, were essential. People believed most heat escaped through the head, and they weren't entirely wrong. A sleeper without a cap was like a knight without armor. Even illuminated manuscripts show people tucked into bed, heads neatly wrapped, looking more ready for travel than for dreams. Poor families often slept in whatever they wore during the day, reusing their underclothes as nightwear. Wealthier nobles commissioned special sleeping garments, embroidered with silk or edged in fur. Ladies' versions sometimes included ribbons or trailing hoods, though those were likely more decorative than functional. But whatever the material, the rule was the same. Cover every inch of skin. Medical texts from the 15th century even advised wrapping feet and hands in cloth before bed to preserve the natural heat. People made makeshift socks and mittens, binding themselves layer by layer. You can almost feel it. The swaddling linen, the smell of wool and lanolin, the faint scratch of fabric against the neck. To sleep was to be wrapped like a parcel against the assault of the night. Scholars debate whether specialized nightclothes were common or reserved for the upper classes. For many, sleepwear was simply yesterday's clothing, hastily adjusted. But all agreed on one principle. Warmth came before modesty, though modesty played its part too. Bed sharing made sleepwear essential for propriety. Even married couples were often depicted wearing long shirts and caps, both for decency and insulation. Imagine preparing for bed this way, undressing only slightly, slipping into the long linen shirt, pulling a cap snug over your ears, and wrapping your feet in wool strips. You slide beneath the covers, the chill biting until your body heat begins to build. Each layer traps a fragment of warmth, turning your body into its own furnace. The room might still be bitter cold, but your body has become a fortress. Every thread is a rampart, every layer another wall between you and the stone's indifference. Nightwear wasn't about comfort, it was about survival. You didn't dress down for bed, you dressed up for battle. The battle against the cold didn't end once you climbed into bed. Medieval people knew that even the heaviest blankets and thickest curtains couldn't hold warmth forever. So they devised clever tricks, small rituals to coax just a little more heat from the night. The most famous of these tools was the humble bed warmer. A bed warmer looked simple, a metal pan with a long wooden handle, usually made of brass or copper. Inside it, servants placed glowing embers or hot coals, then slid it between the sheets before their master went to bed. For a few minutes the bed filled with radiant heat, the linen softening and the chill retreating. The air filled with the faint tang of smoke and metal, mingling with the smells of wax and rushlight. It was a brief moment of luxury in a world that otherwise felt carved from ice, but the trick came with danger. If the servant lingered too long or if the pan touched the cloth directly, the sheets could scorch or worse, catch fire. Some chroniclers record tragic accidents: a careless servant, a bed aflame, a noble's chamber reduced to cinders. Because of this, many grew cautious. They used heated stones instead, wrapped in linen and tucked at their feet. Others boiled water and filled leather flasks or clay jars, the earliest ancestors of hot water bottles. In poorer homes, people made do with whatever they could find. Heated bricks, sand-filled pots, or even iron tools left near the hearth served as makeshift warmers. Anything that could trap and release a little heat was precious. Those objects became nightly companions, passed from hand to hand before bed. Now imagine this scene. A servant enters your chamber, the air so cold her breath fogs as she walks. She carries the bed warmer carefully, coals glowing orange beneath the lid. You can hear the faint scrape of metal as she slides it under the covers, moving it back and forth in slow circles. Steam rises faintly from the sheets. For a brief moment, your fingers tingle with real warmth. Then she withdraws the pan, nods, and departs. You slip into bed, feeling the warmth fade as the cold creeps back slower this time. The ritual worked, at least for a while. These small details of nightly life reveal how inventive people became in their struggle against the cold. There were no thermostats to adjust, no fireplaces that could heat an entire floor. Instead, they relied on a series of tiny, clever habits passed down through generations. A bed warmed by coals, stones wrapped in wool. The strategic placement of a sleeping hound. Each detail a victory in miniature. And it wasn't only at night that people fought the cold. In the grey dawn, when breath smoked in the hallways and water jugs froze solid, the first task of every morning was to rebuild the fire. The servant who tended the hearth was as important as a soldier guarding the gate. Without that fire, the castle might as well have been a glacier. Even the way they positioned furniture spoke of this constant battle. Beds were placed against interior walls, away from outer stone surfaces where frost formed. Chairs and benches crowded near the hearth, leaving the rest of the vast rooms deserted. The entire architecture of domestic life revolved around warmth. How to keep it, how to make it last, how to pretend it was enough. In winter, mornings began slow. People delayed rising, waiting for someone to rekindle the embers. Diaries mention nobles calling out for servants to bring warmed cloaks before they dared to step out of bed. Clothing laid by the fire overnight became treasures of comfort, heated garments wrapped instantly around shivering shoulders. Some castles had fireplaces in upper chambers, but even these provided little relief. The flues were narrow, the fires small, and the smoke often seeped into the room rather than escaping. Walls blackened with soot, ceilings turned brown with residue, yet nobody complained too loudly. Smoke meant heat, and heat meant life. There was a superstition, too, that fire carried blessings. A hearth that burned all night was said to keep illness and evil spirits away. Letting the fire die before dawn invited misfortune. So households developed the ritual of banking the fire, covering embers with ash to keep them glowing till morning. That single gesture ensured that even as the castle slept, the heart of the home still breathed. When dawn finally came, you could hear the castle come alive. Servants sweeping rushes, iron pokers clanging, dogs stirring. Someone opened shutters to the pale light, and icy air rushed in, renewing the cycle of discomfort. Yet there was relief in movement. Cold mattered less when work began again. Despite all their efforts, the truth was this: no one ever truly escaped the cold. The castle was a masterpiece of endurance, not comfort. The cold crept everywhere, into bones, breath, and dreams, but perhaps that was part of what gave medieval life its rhythm. Warmth wasn't something taken for granted. It was something earned. Every spark, every ember, every shared blanket became a small act of triumph against the relentless chill of existence. And if the physical struggle wasn't enough, there was a spiritual one as well. Medieval people believed cold carried moral meaning. Warmth represented life, love, divine grace. Cold symbolized sin, death, and separation from God. To live surrounded by cold was to be constantly reminded of mortality. Sermons of the time spoke of hellfire as both punishment and paradox. Too hot for the wicked, yet too cold for the faithless. Paintings depicted sinners trapped in frozen lakes, an image drawn from Dante's Inferno, where the lowest circle of hell was not fire, but ice. People who endured the long frozen months of winter might have felt a strange comfort in that idea. If they suffered cold now, it meant their souls still walked the earth. So even as you lie in your curtained bed, breath clouding in the air, you sense that the cold isn't just a physical enemy, it's a reminder of fragility. The frost outside is the same frost within, always waiting to creep closer. But so long as the fire glows faint and steady, you've defied it another night. And that defiance is what defined life inside a medieval castle. Every night was a siege. Every dawn was a victory. Imagine waking now. The window slit glows faintly with grey morning light. Your fingers are stiff, your breath fogs, and your blankets have gone heavy with moisture. Somewhere the servant is striking flint, coaxing the day's first fire to life. It's another day, another battle. You rise shivering but alive. And in this world, that alone is triumph. The new day begins not with sunlight, but with the sound of footsteps echoing through the corridors. The castle stirs, each person chasing the same goal: warmth. Servants hurry to open shutters, their fingers stiff and red. Smoke curls up from the kitchen chimney as fires are coaxed back to life. For a few blessed hours, the rooms will no longer feel like crypts. But the moment the fires fade, the chill will creep back in, patient as ever. Even in daylight, the cold ruled everything. It dictated routines, meals, even moods. People rose late, ate hot food whenever possible, and clung to the fire like it was an altar. A simple pot of stew simmering over the hearth could become the day's salvation. The scent of onions, garlic, and meat mingled with the damp air, filling the halls with a promise that warmth and nourishment still existed. Every castle kitchen was its own world, a furious blaze of heat in a landscape of frost. Flames roared in open hearths large enough to roast an ox whole. Copper pots steamed, spits turned, and servants moved quickly to keep the fires alive. To step into the kitchen was to step into another climate entirely. Your skin flushed, your cheeks stung, and your clothes reeked of smoke. But no one complained. For a while, the fire's embrace was worth any discomfort. Kitchens were usually built apart from the main hall to reduce the risk of fire. The result was cruel. While the cooks sweated by the flames, everyone else froze. The short walk between the kitchen and great hall became a gauntlet of icy air. Food arrived lukewarm more often than not, the heat fading long before it reached the Lord's table. In letters from the 14th century, guests at banquets often remark on how quickly dishes cooled, praising servants who ran the fastest. "Better a dish half spilled than one gone cold," one writer joked. The cold touched even the noblest meals. It was an enemy that refused to respect rank. For the poor, cooking fires were their hearth, their heater, and their light all at once. A single flame served every purpose. They couldn't afford to let it die. Keeping a fire alive meant keeping a household alive. Children learned from an early age to nurse embers, feeding them carefully through the night, blowing on coals until they sparked again. The smell of smoke defined the season. It wove into clothing, clung to hair, and soaked into walls. Even nobles carried the scent of their hearths like a badge of life. To smell faintly of smoke was to say, "I am warm. I'm still here," but the cold had another weapon, moisture. Castles were not just cold, but damp. The air heavy with condensation that no fire could truly banish. It warped wood, rusted iron, and gave rise to a constant mildew smell that hung in tapestries and bedding. Servants spent hours beating fabric, scrubbing mold and airing out sheets whenever a dry day came. Still, the damp always returned, whispering through the stone like an invisible tide. That dampness shaped everything, even medicine. Healers warned that cold and wet humors caused illness. Physicians advised wine, hot baths, and thick blankets to restore balance. In some castles, nobles built small heated chambers, primitive saunas, where they could sweat out the chill. A brazier stood at the center, and servants poured water on hot stones to release steam. The effect was fleeting, but the sense of renewal lingered. Peasants had their own remedies. They drank hot ale with honey, or mulled wine spiced with cloves. They rubbed animal fat into their skin to block the cold. Some wore small charms or amulets, believing these would keep the frost from the bones. Survival was as much about ritual as reality. Even sleep, when it came, remained haunted by cold. Chroniclers wrote of people waking to frost on their blankets, the air so sharp that every breath stung. Some nights the wind shrieked through cracks like a living thing. And yet in all these descriptions there's also resilience, an unspoken pride in endurance. The people who lived through such winters didn't see themselves as victims. They saw themselves as tested. It's easy to imagine that warmth was rare, but perhaps that's why they cherished it so deeply. A hot drink, a glowing hearth, a shared bed, all became sacred moments. Where modern life chases comfort as a constant, medieval life found meaning in its scarcity. By midday, the castle would feel almost alive again. Fires blazed in the great hall. Servants bustled with purpose. The hum of life returned, banishing for a time the stillness of the night. Tapestries swayed gently in the draught, knights laughed at the fire, and even the dogs sprawled contentedly on the rushes, soaking up what warmth they could. The sunlight filtering through narrow windows carried little heat, but its glow lifted spirits. Dust floated in golden beams, settling over armor, cups, and faces. For a moment, the stone fortress seemed gentler, softened by light. It was easy to forget that just hours ago, it had felt like a tomb. This daily rhythm, the battle with cold, the fragile peace of daylight, the slow surrender to night, defined castle life for centuries. It shaped how people built, how they worked, how they prayed. The architecture of endurance carved itself into human routine. When evening came again, the cycle repeated. The great hall filled once more with voices, laughter, and smoke. Torches burned low, shadows grew long, and the familiar cold waited just beyond the reach of the fire. Everyone knew what came next. The climb up cold stairs, the layering of clothes, the tightening of curtains, the shivering until warmth slowly returned. It was a ritual as old as the stones themselves. Every breath of warmth was fleeting, but it was enough. Enough to make life bearable, enough to carry people through another night. If you stood then in the courtyard watching your breath rise into the dark, you'd see thin lines of smoke trailing from chimneys. Inside, behind every wall, people huddled against the same enemy, the endless patient cold. Yet there was something beautiful in that struggle, something profoundly human. It was the sound of resilience breathing softly through stone. The medieval world may seem distant, but its truth remains familiar. We still chase warmth, still seek light against darkness, still share our heat with others to make life more bearable. Only our tools have changed. Imagine the castle quieting once more. Fires dim, footsteps fade, and the wind begins its whisper. Somewhere deep in the keep, a candle flickers and goes out. The night takes back its throne, but tomorrow, as always, the fire will rise again. Night returns like a tide, slow and certain. The castle darkens one chamber at a time, as torches gutter and fade. The last servants move silently through the halls, banking fires, latching doors, and whispering prayers for protection. Outside, the wind rises again, sighing through arrow slits and under eaves. The air turns sharp, the kind that nips at skin and sets every sound ringing against the stone. You lie once more within your curtained bed, the memory of the day's brief warmth already fading. The straw mattress creaks beneath you, the scent of smoke and fur heavy in the air. Beyond the curtains, the chamber grows still. You can hear the faint scrape of a rat across the rushes, the low crackle of a dying ember, and the wind pressing at the shutters as if it wants to come inside. This is the sound of a medieval night, the long, slow breathing of a fortress asleep. Every wall, every beam, every flickering light is part of a living organism built to endure. For all its strength, the castle feels fragile now, caught between the power of the elements and the hope of the human heart. As you drift towards sleep, you think of all the people who share this night under the same cold stars. In the kitchen, servants curl up by the ashes. In the stables, grooms and dogs sleep close to the horses, their breath steaming in the dark. In the chapel, a monk keeps vigil, his candle trembling in the draught. Far below, the guards pace the battlements, their armor rimed with frost, eyes scanning the moonlit hills for danger that rarely comes. Each one fights the same silent battle, holding warmth against the cold. It is not war or glory that binds them, but endurance. The understanding that life here means constant negotiation with discomfort. And somehow that struggle gives everything meaning. The castle itself seems to breathe with them. Its stones expand and contract in the cold, timbers groaning softly like the bones of an old creature. Frost traces patterns on the window glass, delicate as lace. Somewhere a shutter bangs, echoing through the corridors like a heartbeat. The great hall, now empty, holds only the faint glow of embers, red as eyes in the dark. For a moment you imagine what it would feel like if all those fires went out, if the hearths turned to ash, if the torches failed, if every trace of warmth vanished. The thought is terrifying. Without fire, without light, the castle would become nothing but a tomb of stone and silence. It's a reminder of how fragile human comfort truly is, how dependent it is on small flickering flames. That is why the medieval fire was sacred. It wasn't merely a tool, it was life itself. Every spark struck from flint was an act of defiance. Every candle lit was a declaration. We will not surrender to the dark. In a world that knew both physical and spiritual cold, the fire was faith made visible. Before sleep fully takes you, you whisper a small prayer, perhaps not for warmth, but for gratitude. Gratitude that even in the hardest nights, humanity learned to adapt, to invent, to find beauty amid hardship. And then slowly, the castle fades into dreams. In those dreams, you walk through the halls once more. Only now they glow with a soft golden light. The air feels warmer, not because the walls have changed, but because the people within them have. You see figures from centuries past, servants tending fires, nobles laughing by the hearth, children chasing dogs across rush-covered floors. They are all alive, all moving, all holding the darkness at bay. The scene feels timeless. Nothing about their tools or garments matters now. What matters is their persistence, the same instinct that drives you to pull a blanket closer, to light a lamp when the room grows dim. Across the centuries, the cold is constant, but so is the will to overcome it. You realize that this is the real story of the castle, not of kings or battles, but of ordinary people who refuse to let the cold define them. The castle stands because they stood. Every stone was laid by hands that shivered but did not stop. Every fire lit by someone who chose hope over despair. The dream fades and dawn comes again. A thin light creeps through the shutters. The fire, banked through the night, still glows faintly in the hearth. Outside, the frost glitters on the battlements. A new day begins. The cold is still there, but so are you. And perhaps that's all survival has ever meant. Not conquering nature, but coexisting with it. Finding warmth where none should exist. As you rise, you pull your cloak tight, breathe in the smoky air, and step toward the door. Beyond it lies another winter's day, grey, sharp, and alive with promise. The castle awaits your footsteps once more, its stones whispering stories of every soul who endured before you. The torch flares to life as you pass, and the hall brightens with its glow. Outside, the wind howls, but within these walls the fire burns. Still, always. And so ends the night in the medieval castle, a world of frost, flame, and human will. A world where the cold was endless, but the light somehow always returned.